Every time my wife and I return from our travels, I design a photo magazine to commemorate the trip. So here's one from California, and this one's from our once-in-a-lifetime cruise along the whole coast of Norway. And here's Cascais and Lisbon in Portugal. These are like the traditional photo albums of previous generations, but I guess as a graphic designer, I just enjoy making them into these little proper publications. And doing this is actually pretty easy and surprisingly affordable these days, with online print services like Blurb, which is the company I've been using for these. So in May and June of last year, we experienced a glorious summer in Oslo, Norway, my hometown. And it's time to design a magazine about it. And you're invited to come along, so let me talk you through my process and show you how I put these together. Okay, so like I said, I've been using Blurb for this, and they have a plugin for Adobe InDesign that helps you set up your file. I'm doing a premium magazine. Their template shows you the bleed line and the trim line and the safe area, and all that stuff is in a non-print layer that you can turn off so you can just see the blank pages. I decided to start preparing this image in Photoshop because this was sort of our first impression on this trip. We climbed these stairs and walked through tunnels in this building to eventually get to our first of 2 Airbnbs. And so what I'm doing here is primarily just straightening things out so that this will work well as a symmetrical spread. And here I'm back in Photoshop prepping the first photo of our Airbnb. This apartment became a really big focus for us because we just really loved it, and it's been an inspiration ever since as we've been looking for a new place to live here in New York. So I'm going to dedicate a lot of space to the apartment in the magazine because that's actually something we really want to be able to remember well about this trip. And again, here I'm adjusting the photo to be straighter by reducing the lens distortion and altering the perspective to have straighter verticals. You'll see me do this a lot. I place this on the first page and then I start working out a template for the following spread. I'm trying to come up with a layout that isn't just a straight grid. I want to do something just a little more dynamic. So I'm spacing things out here and eventually land on this kind of staggered layout. And then here I'm exactly mimicking that stepped layout to create little icons that reference the larger photos to work as sort of a wayfinding thing for captions. And then sorting out how I might differentiate the captions so that it's clear which image they refer to. I wanted to avoid just placing the captions right underneath each image, mostly because it just seemed more fun to do it this way, but also because I thought it was nice to let the images have breathing room around them. Another spread template positions a full bleed image opposite an inset image. And here I'm figuring out what size that inset image should be, and I'm using the position of a horizontal photo from the other page as a guide. This is about creating visual rhythm and a sound structure. And then here's a full bleed spread. This was the ceiling medallion in the apartment. Just a very nice decorative detail. And then another option is placing 2 full-page vertical photos opposite each other. Not sure these two look that great together like this, but I move on. So here I'm playing with picking a color from each photo and picking that up in the relevant caption. I think that's kind of a fun solution. Back to Photoshop for a bit more straightening. Not a whole lot of work to do with this one. Here I decide to swap the 2 photos on the left. I think my thought was that I wanted more of an overview shot at top and then the individual shop detail on the bottom. You know, one sort of introduces the other. One establishes the world, the other zooms in on a character in that world, if that makes any sense. To be honest, I don't spend a ton of time designing these magazines because this is unpaid work, and so some of the time I make really considered decisions that I proudly stand by. I think this is a good one. And other times I end up leaving things be less than perfect. After all, these are just things for my wife and I to look at now and then. You know, I'm not trying to impress anyone, not even myself. Here I've selected a batch of photos of buildings, and I'm processing them at the same time so that they feel reasonably well matched in terms of color and contrast and so on. I could have definitely gone much further by evening the way the skies look in all of them, for example, but I do make one decision here in the end that I think is good and worth talking about. I'm scaling up that red Surya Moria building so that it fills its frame in a way that speaks to the other building photos. Basically, I want there to be a similar amount of sky in each image, or another way to put it is, I want each building's spatial relationship to the top of the frame to be similar. Here's a more extreme example of straightening up the verticals to create a more architectural kind of image for another spread. And then in this photo we have a receding perspective, but I can still straighten up those verticals. Not everyone will agree with the decision to do this. It's not like this is correct and another approach is wrong. In fact, here's a photo where I did not do it, because here there is a more deliberate, dynamic perspective. It would be too extreme to adjust this, and you would lose something in the process. You'd make it a worse photograph. This was the exterior of our Airbnb apartment, so I'm making a little arrow pointing to our balcony. I decided to take this photo and make it into a full spread instead. I love this building, and I like how this photo shows all these different characters living their lives in this beautiful city. You know, you got some people hanging out on their balconies, some are out for a run, some are standing around talking, while others are sitting down at a cafe. Everything in one image. Another moment of straightening verticals, and I'm showing you one more spread here before I skip ahead to making the cover, which is done in a separate file. This has the front and back cover, and then also the inside of those covers. And here I've dug up some contenders for the cover, and to be honest, I'm not too thrilled about any of these. They're all sort of unremarkable photos, but I just didn't have a lot of good options. I had some photos that might have worked well as a cover, but they were shot on my very old iPhone and the resolution would just not have worked very well for this. I actually have a brand new iPhone now, which would work well, but unfortunately I didn't have it yet on this trip. And inside the magazine, most of the photos were shot on my DSLR, and then I do have some iPhone shots in there as well, but I generally avoided using those as full bleed images because I know they won't print very well. So anyway, we gotta work with what we've got. I thought maybe this one would work the best because it is pretty charming, even if that gray wall is occupying quite a lot of real estate. And then I placed this image on the inside covers. I always title these magazines with the location in question and then the dates of our visit. I thought maybe that gray wall could serve as a space for the dates so that it would have utility, but it was difficult to imagine how that would end up looking good, so I switched my approach and tried this photo. And this is where I feel like I really used graphic design to create something interesting out of a mediocre image. This is a benign photo, so what I'm trying to do here is to be just a tiny bit quietly radical about how I'm using it. So the right half here is the front cover, and the left half is the back cover. And I had the thought that it would be cool if I pushed this really far so that you just get a tiny sliver of sky on the left side of the front cover, and otherwise it's just this explosion of green, which felt appropriate too because Oslo really was in full bloom during our visit. But yeah, I liked the idea of having the Oslo text be fully on a green background, and then you just get a peak of blue on there. And then I had a few additional very formal ideas to squeeze something interesting out of this thing. First, I scaled the Oslo title in such a way that I could line up the center of that O with a flower pot beneath it. I really like that. It's a subtle structural thing that you may not notice or think about when you see this cover, but it creates a kind of hidden visual order. So this is roughly what that'll look like. And then here I'm adding a box for the dates and then using my infamous temporary spacing boxes to position it in an interesting way, again building some structure into the design. You can see me doing more of this stuff in my recent video on designing invoices. I end up shifting that box edge over to better fit the dates, but also to strengthen the structural relationship I've set up between the title and the flower pot. And then probably the most secretly radical thing I'm doing with this benign looking design is, if you're at all familiar with Oslo, you'll know that this is a picture of a very famous park there. And in fact, that monument you see in the far distance, which is called the Monolith, that is arguably the most famous monument in Oslo, and it's really big. And so there is something almost subversive about not only using a photo where that is so far away, but I'm actually going to relegate the monument to the spine of my magazine. So it'll actually be completely cropped out of the cover, and you'll only discover it on the spine. And without it, you may never even realize what park this is. You know, in a way, by omitting it, I'm really anonymizing this image even more than what would already be the case. But I think as a result, you're left with something that is perhaps unremarkable, but also beautiful in its mundanity. It's just about greenery and space and shade, and it all just feels quite casual and relaxing, which was very much the vibe of our experience. So in the end, I think this cover works pretty well, especially given what I had to work with. Alright, so at the end of all that, in the Blurb plugin, you can finalize the project and actually send it off to be printed, and that's exactly what I did. And maybe about 2 weeks and $21 later, here it is. I hope you enjoyed watching this Design With Me video, and if you did, I'd love it if you hit that like button and maybe considered subscribing to my channel for more videos about all kinds of artistic and creative things. I'm a designer and animator and all-around artist weirdo living and working in New York City, and I'm figuring out what this YouTube channel is as I go along. Leave a comment and tell me if you want to see more of these kinds of videos in the future, or if there's other stuff I've done that you're hoping for more of, or maybe you're just hoping I can create a soapy K-drama or something, I don't know. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.